Craveable Podcast, Episode 7, Local Harvest Angus Beef.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Craveable Podcast, where real matters. We are your hosts, Ben and Katie and Ben, and today we're going to be talking about local harvest Angus beef.
Exciting stuff. We had the pleasure of going to some of the farms in our beef program, but I don't know where we should begin because it's a pretty all-encompassing topic.
I think, Ben, and this is possibly an unpopular opinion, I think we should begin at the beginning. Now, local harvest is the name of a cooperative of farmers that we are very lucky to work with.
Yep.
And they are based all around the Northeast, as you might be able to guess by the name Local Harvest. They specialize in beautiful Angus beef, Angus cattle, and that's where we get the supply of all of our local Angus beef, both prime and choice.
Yes, and this is distributed through Meyer Natural, largest natural beef purveyors in the country, I believe. Lots of big names behind them, but we do work with a very small collective of farms, as Katie said, that exists in the Northeast, primarily right now being pulled from central Pennsylvania, and also a little bit in upstate New York, but most of that's coming from Pennsylvania, which is actually really close to the processing plant that we're going to talk about, slaughterhouse, if we want to be real about it.
Abattoir, if you want to be fancy about it.
Ooh, also true, true.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been on this trip that we do before. I think this was your first trip. So I want to get your first impressions, because me going back and looking at these farms and seeing it all again really ingratiates myself with the farms that we work with. I mean, there's that very real human touch when you shake the hands with the producers that you work with in programs like this. And we can also get into our own philosophies about beef.
Of which you have many.
Yeah, many. I'm very opinionated, if you couldn't tell. But what was your first impression? Because we started with our drive out to the great state of Pennsylvania, depending on your opinion.
Yes, well, you and I were lucky enough to be in the same vehicle. And on these tours, I often find myself making lots of commentary and asking lots of questions when in the vehicle. So one of the things I said that I believe garnered some chuckles was, there are a lot of animals out here. So I will have to say,
crazy how that works.
It's nuts. But no, in that portion of Pennsylvania where we were, I mean, there were farms everywhere. There were horses everywhere. There were sheep, goats, lots of cows. So it was really clear to me, it's kind of like, okay, this is definitely farming country, and I guess that makes sense. But, Pennsylvania is so huge, and I haven't, as you said, been on that tour before and been to that specific part. So I was like, okay, this is, clearly farming country, not just animals, but tons of farmers with crops full of wheat, barley, soybeans, corn.
Yeah, everything.
All those things. I don't know. I mean, you asked for my take. Is this on a, whole level?
No, let's start with looking at the farms, because, I mean, it is, for lack of a better term, quintessential farmland. The pristine stuff. I mean, I remember the farmer saying to us, and I wish I could remember his name. Sorry, our friend farmer. But I remember him saying, at the end of the day for them, I said it again, right? Here we go. At the end of the day, for these farmers, their money is in the land. It's not buried under the soil. It is in the property that they own, because talk about, commodities that there will never be any more of, that is going to be land. So these guys are set, quote unquote, if anything ever happened, because they have this amount of property, because it's designated farmland, and that is super high value in the United States today. And that spoke to me, because you could really do whatever you want, but they choose to be part of this all natural, hormone-free, antibiotic-free local harvest program through Meyer Natural.
Yeah. So, I mean, our tour involved both visiting the farms and the farmers that run them, as well as the processing plant, also known as an abattoir. And it started with visiting the first farm. So, drive up this dirt road and we meet a couple of the gentlemen who work with Local Harvest. And then we meet the farmer and his grandson. And I think it was such an amazing start to the tour, because we're standing there. We probably just stood in that dusty parking lot for at least 30 minutes. And he was such a great guy.
Yeah.
And, he's like, all right, well, where do I start? And,
we don't know.
The gentleman from Local English were like, well, why don't you tell them like a little bit about the farm? And I mean, he pretty much told us his life story. It was incredible. He was like, well, I'm 74 years old. My family has owned this farm for X amount of generations. This is my grandson. I met my wife when I was 20 and we're still happily married. And we have these, like, he literally told us his life story. And I don't know. I thought that was amazing.
He got cut off by
They cut him off
with Local Harvest because we were just sitting there. We were like enamored by the story because it really is that textbook story of what you think of an American farmer, you know? And I think what was surprising, and both of the guys that we met that day, the other farm that we went to is the same case. Both of these guys, despite what you might think, there's no such thing as a dumb farmer. This is a lot of really hard work, 365, 24/7. And on top of that, it takes a lot of know-how. And both of them ended up doing collegiate programs through Penn State.
Yeah, they did. And so he said, he talked to us for a long time about literally just his life, and I've been farm related before the producers were like, okay, so what about the cows? And, he explained a lot. I mean, he explained basically how he gets the cows, where he gets the cows, the breeding of the cows, the shows that he goes to see the cows, the farmers that are across the way that he sells cows to. There's only a few because he's very particular, and there's like, okay, this one guy he really likes, so okay, he'll sell him, one of his bulls, but not really anyone else.
Right.
And he also said it was just him and his grandson running the farm.
Yeah.
Just the two of them. I think there was like 600 head of cattle there total, something around that.
I think like about half. I think they do that much like throughout the year. I didn't do like a real count on what we saw. We can always post pictures with this. Don't worry. Stacy's listening to this. She's going to post pictures for you guys. But I think there was maybe like 60 to 80 head there at the time. In that one.
There was like 90. I think it was like 80 or 90.
Yeah.
But there's multiple barns around the farm, I think. But yeah, I mean, it was incredible. His grandson was maybe 13.
Yeah, 13, 14, pretty young.
And yeah, young kid. And the two of them run the farm just by themselves. And, we talked about, I think one of our bosses asked the kid, he's like, do you want to, is this something you see yourself doing? And he was pretty shy, but he was like, yep,
definitely.
Definitely, want to do this. And the grandfather said, well, I'm not going to pressure him into it, but farm's here for him if he wants it, type
which
thing.
Is big.
Yeah, I think he only had the daughter, so I mean that's amazing. But it was really awesome to meet them, and then we walked over to the barn where the cows are getting finished. Now he explained to us that, and now I know a lot of people. We could go down the grass-fed train for many, many miles, but
it'll come up at some point when we talk about the next farm.
But this particular program is grain finished. So the cows are raised on open pasture for the majority of their lives. And then for at most 90 days, I believe he said, they are finished on what's usually a blend of local grains. And sometimes, I mean, it depends on the farm's capacity. Some of these farmers are growing the grains themselves. Some of them are buying from their buddies locally who grow them.
Right.
But either way, it's a really nice, high quality blend of local grains. And we were witnessing that portion. So just all these happy cows just kind of like milling about, hanging out with each other in this barn, they're just eating, hanging out, doing what all mammals do.
Which is...
it's not polite to talk about using the bathroom on the radio, Ben, okay?
No, I mean, that's what they do. Yeah, and that's part of it's a machine that turns grass into meat and manure, right?
Yes. Yes. So what did you think of the farm, or even if you want to touch on the second farm we saw?
I thought it's super pristine. It's exactly what you imagine when you think of like a pristine farm, not in the sense that, it's like super clean or anything like that, because they're not wallowing in filth or anything, but you're standing on a hay-packed barn where they're going to the bathroom, and there's not really much aroma. There's not a bunch of that like ammoniated air that you would have in a tighter pen.
No, yeah, it did not sound like that.
and the cows are happy. They're maybe slightly skittish. I mean, herd animals, they kind of move together. So if they calm down, they would walk towards us, and then all of them would kind of gather. And we were on this kind of upper plankway above them, looking at them. And you can just see, it's one of those things. If you see sickly cows and sick animals, you're going to notice right away. All these animals look super healthy. There's a mix of colors mixed in. They are mostly Black Angus, but I think they do mix in a little bit of Holstein, I believe he said, because it's not 100% Angus from this program. I know it's more than 50%. And then we walked down and ended up having cookies and sweet tea from the farmer's wife. And it's just like, I know it's almost like we're glancing over the details, right? But like, what are the details? You go to a pristine farm that's raising animals in the way that you think that they would be raised. And he had joined Local Harvest because he would end up getting a higher value for the carcass because he has these things behind it, because it's 100% all natural in the terms of being hormone free, being antibiotic free. And then they partner with larger companies like Meyer Natural because they need that distribution network to get that super high quality beef from that farm to a processing plant and then to other distributors nationwide. And that takes a whole network. You know what I mean? Like, these guys can't go it alone. And they love Local Harvest for it because it brings them a lot of success, and success not just to that farm, but to the community, like you said, because these farmers also benefit the people who are growing grain for cattle, and then the other systems that the next gentleman that we spoke with talked about too.
Yeah, and I do remember you just saying that, jogged my memory. One thing he said, he was like, "Oh, the day that I can't work with Local Angus anymore is like the day I'm done with this." And he was like,
Local Harvest.
Yeah, Local Harvest. And he was kind of kidding, but he was also like, yeah, I never want to work with one of these large scale producers that's not doing all natural.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not interested in that at all. So that was awesome. And then the next farm we visited, we went to lunch actually after that with this farmer and his wife and 3 of their, I think, 6 kids. And they were awesome people.
Yeah, significantly young, probably a full generation younger than the guy that we had met, who was in, I think, his 70s. And then this guy was probably, 41. They look pretty good. Let's say 38.
No, okay. It's like there's a lot of kids. But no, they were amazing. I mean, he was, like Ben said, all farmers are incredibly intelligent. This gentleman was
a scientist, basically.
Literally a scientist. Like,
agronomist is the word that he used.
Agronomist,
an agricultural economist.
And I asked what it was. He was talking to us, and I think I raised my hand and I was like, "What's an agronomist?" And he was like, "Okay, so think agriculture and economy. It's basically the melding of those two things." And I mean, I just thought that was so cool. I think he had like 2 PhDs, at least 2 masters. I don't know. He went to a lot of school, and they do a lot more on their farm than just raise cows for beef.
Yeah, he had a lot of property. We saw one of the properties. I think he mentioned 2 or 3 others. And what he does is essentially work with the community in having them raise animals properly and finding more economical ways for them to function. Like he was telling us that they're looking at doing solar panels so that way they can not only just go green for the marketing, that's whatever, but they're literally saving money and able to hook up to the grid without having to get involved with the township and have things lined up, so they can be much more self-sufficient. And then he also trains other farmers how to do things like that because it benefits them. They will eventually be raising crops underneath the shade because there's studies that show crops raised under shade do better overall. Yeah, and then he's also going to have the lamb that's raised under the shade, basically growing grass under these
solar panels.
Solar panels, thank you. I forgot what the word was 5 seconds ago. And then using those lamb for blah, blah, blah. So like just the most efficient use of the land, the time, the money that they have.
Yeah, exactly. And they, I mean, so their business is called Campbell's Crops. And I remember, I was like, okay, so explain this to me because, we're here for the purpose of starting beef farm, et cetera, et cetera. And they basically, will produce and sell seeds as well, a wide variety of seeds. They also had some goats on the property, And they also have an entire milking operation. So,
so we saw the calves.
We saw the calves that are, part of the milking program. I believe that's the Holstein, the black and white.
Right.
But so we saw those, and like I said, that's a whole.
No, I think they're like dairy or something like that. There's a different name for those.
Frisian, I don't know. Anyway,
right.
Dairy cows.
Yeah.
They have a whole part of that operation as well. And what was really cool to see, among other things, because we saw a lot at that farm that was really neat, was their kids. So we just were there with their 3 eldest children, and they were so cool. Like, I went off at one point with them.
You ran off because you saw baby cows.
Okay, why would anyone not do that?
Right. I don't disagree.
They were adorable. And so, yes, I ran off with the kids to look at the calves, and they had names for all of them. They each had a favorite. And that was when they really opened up, and we're like, okay, like, what's your favorite job on the farm? And like, what's
your least favorite job?
Yeah, I think you were asking them the hard questions.
Oh, of course.
And they were super enthusiastic, and they were like, oh, this one's my favorite cow. This is mine favorite, but like, she's kind of shy, but this and that. And I mean, they were so comfortable and happy on that farm. And like, obviously they all knew what they were doing. And, they all, when we went to see the goats, they were like, oh, well, let me show you this one. This one's my buddy. And I think one of the kids
jumped on top of it and rode it by its horns.
He rode the goat.
And you're like,
he did ride the goat. It was amazing. But no, so that's very cool, because they do go around and help them. And I think you or someone else asked how many people he employs on that farm, the Campbells, and I think it was only like 6, and some of them were part-time.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even that many people. But what stood out to you about that particular farm visit?
What stood out to me is looking at the corn silage that we looked at, because
I was hoping you would say literally
I think that's the important thing to talk about, because this is essentially when you're done, like you said, he's growing crops and he's growing seed and things like that. So he's growing corn. And what they do afterwards, corn silage, is essentially you pick all the ears off of the corn, and then you have all those stalks left over. And corn silage and corn stalks are literally grass. So they take these things, they grind them down, and they put them on a cement block, and then they mash it down as much as they can. They'll literally just take their tractor, drive over it, press it down until it's as tight as they possibly can, because they don't want any air pockets, covered in plastic, put some weight on top of it. It happens to be pretty often that you might see on the side of the road a bunch of tires on top of a white tarp mound. That is corn silage in an anaerobic environment fermenting. That way it's easier for the animals to digest, and they get a lot more nutrition out of the fermented corn silage.
Tidbit: anaerobic without oxygen. Am I right?
Correct.
That'd be really embarrassing if I
nailed
wasn't.
it.
Thank you.
We'll have a little pop-up or something.
I hope that'd be cool.
Fix it in post.
In post. So I thought that was really cool, and like interesting. You just pointed that out, because I never knew what that was. But so basically, that corn ferments, and I was like, so why doesn't it? I mean, the anaerobic, the no oxygen environment is super important. But I was like, okay, so how? I think we asked, how long is this good here for? What did he say? Like forever?
Yeah, he's like, it's really not going to go bad. And it's going to hold a certain moisture content, too.
That's exactly what
like
he said.
when he pulled out, he's like, this is probably the perfect consistency, because it's got some moisture in it.
Well, let's get to
and
when
then they can still dry it a little bit. And then when he had the backhoe come out with a full backhoe of corn silage, right? And it just, if you've ever been to a brewery and they're brewing, it smells like that. It's that fermented grass or legume nut kind of flavor, like whatever you want to call it. It's that smell of fermenting crop. So, and it smells like precursor to alcohol. You take that corn silage, you throw it into a still, make a little vodka.
So then he goes, okay, corn vodka. So then he's like, oh, we're all looking at it, and he's describing it, and he's like,
you can eat this.
He looks at us and he's like, it's not going to hurt you. And he just like takes a decent amount and just like pops it in his mouth, and we're like,
no, thank you.
Well, no. Then Doug was like, well, I've got to try it if he's trying it. And he like goes to eat some, and then Ben's like, all right, well, I mean, they know.
Doug's our director of procurement.
Yeah. And then I'm standing there and I'm like, but everyone's doing it. Like, normally I don't follow the trends, but like then I go up and I smell it and I'm like, no, I'm not interested in that.
Yeah, no.
And then like 30 seconds later, I did. I went up and I was like, all right, I'm going to try it. So I didn't swallow it, because something about, even though he promised it'd be fine, it didn't taste that bad. It tasted like kind of pickled vegetation.
Yeah, it's literally what it is. So I don't know what you were expecting.
Really fibrous pickled vegetation. No, it was fine. And but I thought that was super cool because it's kind of been pickled. There's like all those just the, I don't know if bacteria is the right word, but that process will basically, inhibit the forming of any mold.
Right.
Which was my concern. I'm like, okay, if you have like a damp thing under a tarp for 2 years and you're saying it's good forever, but that natural process, that fermentation prevents that. So that was super cool.
Yeah. And it doesn't break down into like compost or anything like
No.
that.
Yeah. I was super surprised by that. And they were growing in the barley.
And it's important for people to understand that these aren't corn fed. It's not full of grain. There's a handful, amongst the mass that we saw, you'd have to get in real close and see a few corn kernels, but it's not like they're feeding them corn. It's totally different material. It's not full of starch like the corn kernels are. And they are grass fed. Corn silage is a grass, but to your point from earlier, some farmers will grow alfalfa and other crops like that to feed them as they're grass feeding, or just let them out on a pasture. But you have to understand that for let's call it 4 months of the year, it's not
no grass.
Yeah, there's no grass growing, and they have to feed these animals while they're in the barns, especially in the deep part of winter. And this is perfect for it. It's a perfect ecosystem.
Yeah. And they had, so when we were driving in, there was this gorgeous field of just beautiful golden something. We didn't know what it was.
Like, waving in the wind.
It was
yeah, you're like,
beautiful.
Oh,
it was just like, it was waving in the wind.
Oh, my wallpaper came to life.
It was very pretty. And so we asked what it was, and he was like, oh, that's barley. And like then one of the guys from local harvest came over and like picked some. He gave us each. And I was like, wow, this is super cool. Okay, like here's some barley that they're also growing. Definitely thought that was really neat. And their cows were funny. Their cows were the ones that were like ganging up on us. They noticed, ganging up is not the right word, but they noticed that we were all down on like one end of the barn they were in. And they all like ran down and we were like, what's going on right now? Or should we be like afraid? And then they all, literally all of them, like turned pretty much at the same time to face us. And we were like, does anyone else feel like we're about to get charged right now?
They're just staring. Curious animals,
smart animals. Staring. They were so cool. Adorable. And a lot of them, they came up, we pet them. We're like, hey, buddy, how are you? That was super cool. Yeah.
He had a mix of breeds too, because he did have a handful of Wagyu cross cattle in the mix. And you could tell, you were like, that is a gigantic black cattle. And you see the little W on the ears. That's the other interesting thing, is that they're tagged in both ears. And one ear is for the breed and the other ear is for the number of the cattle. And they organize it that way. And you'd think like, what a complicated system, but they really do have it down pat. And then we kind of go from this pristine farmland and these, all the farmers were talking up local harvest like crazy. I mean, they absolutely love working with this program because they get to do things the right way. And then you get more into what I find the fascinating side, and the nitty gritty of it is, well, what do you do with this animal once you take it off the farm?
Ben, I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly the direction I wanted to take this in. However, we're going to hold it there. Yeah. And we would love to have you join us for part 2 of this wonderful episode, where we will take you into the processing facility and abattoir. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe, please.
3, 2, 1.